Charleston, South Carolina is one of the top tourist destinations on the planet. It was named Best City in the World 3 years ago by Travel and Leisure, and Best City in America 7 years in a row. Millions flock to see Charleston's stunning architecture, restaurants, and history. Until now, though, many don't learn about one crucial part of the city's story. Charleston was once the largest port of entry for enslaved people into the U.S. A few weeks ago, the city held a groundbreaking for a $100 million museum, hoping to change that. The sights and sounds of a genteel Charleston are a brutal contrast to an inescapable reality. Beginning in the 17th century and continuing until 1808, when the Atlantic slave trade was banned by the U.S. government, hundreds of thousands of people were forced onto ships and brought here to be sold. This construction site will soon be a museum, built on the spot where many of those enslaved people first stepped on shore.
It's pretty remarkable to consider what's going to be here in a matter of, I guess, a couple of years.
Elijah Hayward is the museum's COO. When you think about what this wharf looked like 200 years ago,
yeah,
and then think about what it looks like today, what goes through your mind?
It's really gripping. There's an amazing opportunity that we have to tell the story of that moment that has really impacted America, but also of what was achieved and explored beyond that moment.
Do you think there are times when people forget the suffering that took place before?
Of course they do.
Joseph Riley was mayor of Charleston for over 4 decades. He'd been trying to get this museum built for 20 years. But it wasn't until 9 African Americans were killed in 2015 at the Emmanuel AME Church that a renewed spirit of outreach pushed the project forward.
Small cities seldom have the opportunity to create something of great importance to the whole country. And the story told here is an American story, and it's told better here than any place in the country.
The museum says as many as 80% of African Americans could trace an ancestor through the port of Charleston. In 1 year alone, 200 ships filled with 30,000 captive Africans landed here. Growing up in and around this area, did you ever think something like this would be built?
I think I had hopes that it would be built, but I think that I'm definitely living a dream right now.
When completed, the 31,000 square foot museum will feature galleries and exhibit halls devoted to the stories of people forced to make the trip across the Atlantic, both before and after the United States was formed as a country.
This is really meant to be a sacred space that allows a visitor to pause and consider what this site is all about in a larger sense.
There are also plans for a genealogical center to help people trace their roots, a sort of Ellis Island for African Americans.
The South was driven by slave labor.
Although opportunities to learn about Charleston's full story have been limited, it has already been changing.
I've noticed I don't hear the term slave used. I hear the term enslaved people.
Correct. So we want to take them from being reduced to property to being enslaved people.
At McLeod Plantation in Charleston, children as young as 5 were forced to work picking and processing cotton. Now, McLeod is one of only 2 plantations in the country whose primary focus is educating about the history of slavery. Does working at a place like this make you hurt, or does it make you hopeful?
It makes me hopeful.
Olivia Williams and John Gardner are historical interpreters for the plantation.
I tell people that on my tour, everything that you see in Charleston, down to the bricks that were handmade by enslaved people, they literally built the city.
And keep in mind, Charleston was a very wealthy city. Because remember, the wealth of the people was based on the number of slaves you had.
The huts that housed some of those enslaved people more than 150 years ago are still standing, as is the gin mill some worked in.
So these 3 fingerprints here in the bricks.
It's a child's.
Yes, children, enslaved children were making these bricks.
And you can see it right here.
Right here, these 3. This part, especially when kids are actually on the tour, and I mean, there are kids who will walk up and put their 3 little fingers into these spaces, and it's just such a moving experience, and this really makes it real for people.
Talking about the truth, it hurts sometimes, but it also heals. And I think that's what we're trying to do here from the standpoint of getting folks understanding background history and why the history we've had here in slavery has such an impact on what we do in the United States today.
Currently, tourists from all over choose to visit Charleston. Soon, they'll be able to learn about the people who came here with no choice. Elijah Hayward says the best place to do that is the spot where their American stories began.
You have the trauma, the pain, but there's also the triumph that's important for us to tell the story of everything that was accomplished in spite of that, the perseverance, the ingenuity, the creativity that still continues to shape America today.
And they're trying to do this project very deliberately, very carefully, slowly. Hopefully it will be built within 2 years, but as we said, in the making for 20 years, or you could say 200 plus years.
Yes, you know, slavery, I call it the lasting stain on our American psyche. And for a lot of people who still question, oh, it happened so long ago, there has been a lasting impact. Impact remains, and this is a place people can go and learn about what some of the laws in place and some of the lasting impact of slavery will have on this generation.
Those little fingerprints, that
Yeah.
doesn't get you.